He called me a thief in front of the entire board of directors. He had a lawyer's letter, a forged paper trail, and a smile that said he had already won. What he did not know was that I had been quietly copying every file for 6 months. Let me take you back to the beginning. I started at Vantara Solutions on a Tuesday in early March, 3 years before any of this happened. The office was one of those open-plan spaces with exposed brick and pendant lights that was supposed to signal creativity, but mostly just made it hard to hear phone calls. My desk was near the back wall, next to a window that looked out onto a narrow alley and a dumpster. Not glamorous. I did not need glamorous. I needed a spreadsheet, a quiet chair, and access to the general ledger. My name is Clara. I had been in accounting for 11 years by then. I was not the loudest person in any room. I was the person who noticed when the numbers in column G did not match the totals in column H, and who stayed until 8 in the evening to find out why. My colleagues liked me well enough. They called me reliable. They called me thorough. One of the senior managers once said I had the personality of a very good audit. I chose to take it as a compliment. The CEO was a man named Daniel Foss. He was 43 years old, tall, with the kind of jaw that looks good in investor decks, and the kind of handshake that lasts half a second too long. He had founded Vantara 6 years earlier as a logistics software startup, grown it to 80 employees, and was in the middle of a Series B funding round when I joined. The office had his energy everywhere. His quotes were printed on the walls. His photo was on the website homepage. His voice was the loudest in every room he entered, and he entered every room as if it had been waiting for him. I noticed him properly on my 3rd week. He stopped by my desk on a Friday afternoon, coffee in hand, and asked how I was settling in. I told him fine. He asked if the numbers made sense to me yet. I said most of them did. He smiled and said something I would remember later. He said, "Good. Just remember, Clara, big vision sometimes moves faster than the paperwork. That is not a problem. That is just growth." I smiled back. I wrote nothing down, but I filed it. For the first year, everything looked more or less normal. Vantara was growing fast, which meant the books were messy in the way fast-growing companies are always messy. Duplicate vendor invoices, expense reports filed late, contract terms that did not match what was actually paid. Standard chaos. I cleaned it up. I built better tracking systems. I flagged irregularities, wrote memos, sent emails with red receipts. I was good at my job, and I was quiet about it, which meant people forgot I was there. That is useful. People say things when they forget you are there. The 2nd year is when I started to feel it. Not see it yet, feel it. It started with a vendor called Meridian Consulting. They appeared in the accounts in late autumn, billed at a monthly retainer of $42,000. $42,000 a month for what the invoice described as strategic advisory services. I looked for a contract. There was no contract in the system. I looked for a scope of work. There was none. I looked for any deliverable, any report, any email thread that justified the payment. Nothing. I sent a request to the finance director, a man named Greg who wore short-sleeved shirts in winter and laughed too hard at everything Daniel said. Greg told me the Meridian arrangement was handled directly by the executive team and that I should mark it as approved and move on. I marked it as approved. I did not move on. I pulled the incorporation records for Meridian Consulting. It had been registered 8 months earlier in Delaware. The registered agent was a law firm. The listed director was a name I did not recognize. But the mailing address on the filing was a post office box in the same zip code as Daniel Foss's home address. I know this because I had once processed a reimbursement check that was mailed to his house. I sat with that for a long time. I looked at the alley outside my window. A delivery truck was parked down there, engine running, going nowhere. I did not say anything, not yet. Over the following 4 months, I found 3 more vendor accounts with similar profiles. No contracts, vague service descriptions, payments ranging from $18,000 to $60,000 per month. One of them, a company called Helix Advisory Group, had an address that traced back to a UPS store 2 blocks from Daniel's gym. I found that out because Daniel once mentioned the gym in a team meeting, and I looked up the address afterward. The way you do when a detail bothers you, and you cannot explain why. I kept a personal log, not on the company system, on a small encrypted drive I kept in my bag. Every entry was dated, sourced, and cross-referenced. I'm an accountant. This is what we do. I also started making copies. Not dramatic, sweeping downloads, careful, methodical backups. Every month-end ledger, every payment run, every bank reconciliation, every email I sent flagging irregularities, along with the non-responses or deflections I received back. I stored them in 3 places: the encrypted drive, a personal cloud account, and a USB stick I kept at home in a fireproof box that also contained my passport and my grandmother's ring. My grandmother's ring is a plain silver band with a small chip in the metal where she once caught it on a gate latch. She gave it to me the year before she died. She told me it was not valuable, but it was hers, and that was enough. I wore it on my right hand every day. I'm telling you about the ring because it comes back. By month 18 of my investigation, which is what it was by then, even if I had not named it that yet, I had documented approximately $2.3 million in payments to entities I could not verify as legitimate vendors. The payments were structured to stay just under internal approval thresholds. Someone who understood the approval matrix very well had designed this. Someone like, for instance, the person who approved the budget that created the approval matrix. In February of the 3rd year, I contacted an external auditor. His name was Martin Reyes. He worked for a small forensic accounting firm that specialized in fraud investigations. I had met him at a professional development seminar 2 years before Vantara. He was precise, quiet, and had a habit of underlining things twice when they mattered. I liked him immediately. I sent Martin an anonymous inquiry first, describing the situation in general terms without names. He responded within 2 days. We met at a coffee shop on a Wednesday morning, the kind of place where the tables are too small and the music is too loud and nobody pays attention to anyone else. I brought a printed summary. He read it without speaking. Then he underlined 2 things, twice each. He said, "This is not sloppy bookkeeping. This is deliberate." I said I knew. He said, "If you want to take this forward, you need to be very careful. People who do this kind of thing do not stop at financial fraud when they feel threatened." I said I knew that too. We agreed on a process. Martin would conduct a parallel independent review, working from the documents I provided. He would produce a formal forensic report. We would not approach the board or any regulator until the report was complete and verified. Until then, I would continue doing my job exactly as I always had. Quietly, thoroughly, without any sign that I knew what I knew. I went back to the office. I made coffee. I sat at my desk by the window. The dumpster in the alley had been replaced with a new one, bright blue. I opened the general ledger and started the month-end close. The all-hands meeting happened in April. Daniel held them every quarter. He was good at them, I will give him that. He had the gift of making a room feel like it was full of pioneers. He would stand at the front with his sleeves rolled up and talk about disruption and momentum and the future they were all building together, and people would nod and feel chosen. I had watched it happen 8 times by then. I had gotten better at watching the performance instead of feeling it. This particular all-hands was different in one way. About 15 minutes in, Daniel shifted his tone. He became quieter, more serious. He said the company was in a critical growth phase. He said growth required trust. He said trust required loyalty. And then he said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "I have no patience for people who let small, petty concerns get in the way of what we are building here. Numbers are a tool. They serve the vision. They do not define it. Loyalty to this team, to this mission, is worth more than any line item on any spreadsheet." He paused. He looked around the room. His eyes passed over me. He smiled. I wrote the quote down in my notebook, word for word. I underlined it twice. I thought Martin would appreciate that. 3 weeks after the all-hands, I found the fabricated evidence. I was doing a routine reconciliation when I noticed a discrepancy in the petty cash account. Small amount, $240. Normally, I would have chased it down through the usual channels. This time, something made me look at the underlying transaction records more carefully. The discrepancy traced back to a petty cash withdrawal that had been logged under my employee ID. I had not made any petty cash withdrawal. I pulled the access logs. The withdrawal had been entered from a terminal in the finance office, which I used at a time when I had been in an off-site meeting. I had the meeting in my calendar. I had the sign-in sheet from the venue. I had 3 email exchanges from that afternoon that were time-stamped from my phone, not from any office terminal. I sat very still for a moment. Then I looked further back. Over the previous 2 months, there were 6 similar entries, small amounts, all logged under my ID, all at times I could account for elsewhere. Someone had been building a paper trail, someone who had access to the finance system at the administrative level, someone who wanted a narrative ready in case they needed one. I took screenshots of everything. I added them to the encrypted drive. I sent a copy to Martin that evening with a note that said, "They know or they suspect, and they are preparing. Move faster if you can." Martin called me the next morning. He said the report would be ready in 3 weeks. I said I might not have 3 weeks. He said he would have something preliminary in 10 days. The call came on a Thursday morning, 9 days later. I was at my desk. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. It was one of those thick ceramic mugs the office had ordered in bulk, dark green with the Vantara logo on the side. I had used the same one every day for 3 years. I remember noticing it, the cold coffee and the logo, right before my phone rang. It was Daniel's assistant. She asked me to come to the conference room. She sounded stiff, in the way people sound when they have been told what to say. The conference room had 3 people in it. Daniel, Greg from finance, and a woman I did not know who introduced herself as the company's legal counsel. Her name was Sandra. She was wearing a blazer the colour of a thunderstorm. Daniel did not offer me a seat. He stood at the head of the table with a folder in front of him and said, "Clara, we have a serious problem."
I sat down anyway. He opened the folder. He laid out printed pages, the fabricated transaction logs, a printed summary of the discrepancies, and a letter on legal letterhead that described an internal investigation into suspected employee theft and financial misconduct. My name appeared in the letter 4 times. He spoke for about 6 minutes. He was measured, almost kind. He said he was disappointed. He said he had hoped it would not come to this. He said the company's investors could not be exposed to this kind of liability. He said my access would be suspended immediately and that I should return my laptop and my keycard. Sandra pushed a document across the table. It was a separation agreement. It included a non-disclosure clause. I looked at the document. I looked at Daniel. I looked at Greg, who was studying the table with great intensity. I said, I would like a few days to review this with my own legal counsel. Daniel said that was my right, but that the situation was time sensitive. I said I understood. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I left the green coffee mug on the table. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I stood there, looking at the brushed metal doors until they opened. I got in. I pressed the ground floor button. The doors closed. I did not cry. I was too busy thinking. I called Martin from the parking garage. I told him what had just happened. He said, "Well, good. This actually helps us. It establishes that they are aware of the exposure and are attempting to suppress it. That is relevant to intent." I said, "How soon can you finalize the report?" He said, "Give me 72 hours." I spent those 72 hours being very careful. I responded to Sandra's emails politely and without commitment. I told her I was reviewing the agreement. I said nothing that could be interpreted as an admission. I also, during those 3 days, made contact with 2 people. The first was an attorney who specialized in employment law and whistleblower protections. Her name was Priya. She had a small office above a dry cleaner, and she listened to everything I said without interrupting, which I found enormously comforting. She reviewed the documents I brought and told me that what Daniel had done constituted retaliatory action against a protected disclosure, and that the fabricated evidence potentially constituted fraud and defamation. She said, "They have made a significant mistake." The second person I contacted was a member of Vantara's board of directors. His name was Howard Lenz. He was one of the original seed investors and still held a board seat. I had met him twice at company events. He had struck me as a man who asked careful questions and did not like surprises. I sent him a brief, formal email. I said I had information of material importance to the board and the ongoing Series B process, and that I wished to speak with him before the next scheduled board meeting, which was 10 days away.
I included a one-paragraph summary, vague enough to require a follow-up, but specific enough to be alarming. He replied within 4 hours. He said he would be in touch to arrange a call. Martin's preliminary report arrived on the third day. It was 41 pages. It was precise, sourced, and devastating. It documented the fraudulent vendor scheme, estimated the total diverted funds at approximately $3.1 million, identified the structural mechanisms used to conceal the payments, and noted that the timing and nature of certain system entries suggested deliberate fabrication of records, consistent with an attempt to implicate another employee. That last part was important. It meant the frame-up was in the report. I forwarded a copy to Priya and to Howard Lenz with a cover note that was 3 sentences long. I said I was available to present this in person at the board meeting if the board considered it appropriate. I said I had the underlying documentation available for review. I said I had not yet signed any separation agreement. Howard Lenz called me that evening. He was quiet on the phone, not cold. Quiet in the way of someone processing something large. He asked me 2 questions. He asked whether the report had been produced by a qualified forensic accountant. I said yes and gave Martin's credentials. He asked whether I had retained legal counsel. I said yes. He said, "I will arrange for you to present at the board meeting. Do not sign anything before then." I said I would not. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a while. The ring on my right hand caught the light from the overhead lamp. I turned it around my finger once and thought about my grandmother, who had never once in her life looked away from something because it was inconvenient. The board meeting was held on a Tuesday in the company's main conference room, on the 4th floor, with the long table and the glass walls that looked out over the open plan office. There were 7 people present, the 4 board members, including Howard, the CFO, who had been brought in 18 months ago, and who I suspected knew more than he had ever said, Daniel and Sandra, the legal counsel, and me. Daniel did not know I was coming. He saw me walk in, and his face did something complicated. The smile appeared and disappeared in about half a second. He looked at Howard. Howard looked at the table. Howard opened the meeting. He said there were matters requiring the board's urgent attention before the Series B close. He said he had asked an external forensic accountant and a former employee to present findings. He said the board had reviewed the preliminary report overnight and had questions. Daniel said, "I am not sure this is the appropriate forum for an HR matter." Howard said, "This is not an HR matter, Daniel." Martin presented first. He was calm and methodical, the way a good forensic accountant always is. He walked through the vendor scheme step by step. He named the entities. He showed the payment flows. He showed the incorporation records. He showed the address correlations. He showed the approval structure that had been designed to bypass oversight. He used a projected slide deck and a laser pointer, and spoke in complete sentences without hesitation. The room was very quiet. At one point, Daniel said, "These are third-party vendors with legitimate contracts." Martin said, "There are no contracts in the company's records for any of these vendors. If they exist, the board should request them immediately." Daniel said the contracts were managed at the executive level. Martin said, "That is consistent with the pattern of concealment documented in this report." Then I presented. I was not nervous. I had been preparing for this for 6 months. I had the original flagging emails I had sent to Greg, with timestamps and red receipts. I had the non-responses. I had the access logs showing the fabricated entries under my employee ID. I had my calendar entries, the sign-in sheet, and the timestamped phone emails proving I was not in the building when those entries were made. I had a printed copy of the separation agreement with the NDA clause highlighted. I placed a copy of everything in front of each board member. Priya had advised me to do this. Paper in hand changes the feeling of a room. I said, after I identified these irregularities and documented them, entries were made in the company's financial system under my employee ID. At times I was not present. These entries were then used as the basis for an accusation of theft against me and a request that I sign a non-disclosure agreement. I did not sign it. This is everything I found and everything that was done in response to my finding it. I sat down. One of the board members, a woman named Dr. Anita Roche, who I had never spoken to before, looked at Daniel and said very quietly, "Is any of this inaccurate?" Daniel said, "Clara has clearly been building a case against me for personal reasons. This is a disgruntled employee situation." Dr. Roche said, "That is not what I asked." Daniel looked at Sandra. Sandra was looking at her notepad. He tried 3 more times. He said the vendors were legitimate and the documentation existed somewhere. He said the forensic report was based on incomplete data. He said the all-hands comments about loyalty had been taken out of context. He said he had built this company from nothing and that he deserved the benefit of the doubt. That last sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Howard said, "We are going to need to pause the Series B process pending a full external audit. And we are going to need to discuss your role going forward, Daniel." Daniel said, "You cannot be serious." Howard said, "I'm afraid we are." Daniel stood up. He said something about vision and sacrifice and people who did not understand what it took to build something real. His voice was louder than it needed to be. His hands were pressing flat against the table as if he needed to hold himself up. Then he stopped. He looked around the room. He looked at the board members, who were all looking at the documents in front of them or at each other. He looked at Greg, who had not said a single word the entire meeting, and who was now very interested in a point on the wall behind my left shoulder. He looked at Sandra, who had closed her notepad. He looked at me last. I looked back. I did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. He picked up his phone and his folder and walked out. The glass door swung shut behind him. Through the glass walls, I could see the open plan office below, people at their desks, completely unaware. Someone was laughing at something on a screen. The pendant lights were on. It looked exactly the same as it had on my first day. The board meeting continued for another 2 hours without him. The consequences unfolded over the following 6 weeks in the way these things do. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in a sequence of formal steps, each one smaller and colder than the last. Daniel Foss was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours of the board meeting. The full external audit was commissioned the same week. The Series B investors were notified that the round was being suspended pending the audit outcome. I was told later by Howard Lenz in a brief phone call that 2 of the lead investors withdrew entirely upon receiving the preliminary findings. The third said they would revisit the situation in 12 months, which is investor language for probably never. The audit confirmed Martin's findings and added approximately $800,000 in additional irregularities that had not been in the preliminary report. The total diverted funds were estimated at just under $4 million. Criminal referrals were made. I was told not to discuss the details publicly while the matter was under investigation, and I have not. Daniel resigned his position formally about 3 weeks after the board meeting. The announcement was brief and vague. It said he was stepping down to pursue new opportunities. There was no vision statement. There was no quote on the wall about it afterward. Someone, I heard later, quietly took down the framed quotes in the office hallway. I was not there to see it. Greg from finance resigned 2 days after Daniel. I did not ask what arrangement he had reached with the company or with the investigators. That was not my concern. Priya filed the whistleblower retaliation claim on my behalf. It was settled several months later. I am not going to give you a number because that is not the point of the story, but I will tell you it was enough to cover a year of living carefully and starting something new. The separation agreement with the NDA was never signed. The unsigned copy is still in my files. I keep it there not out of spite, but because it is a useful reminder of what someone thought they could make me do. After everything was settled, I went back to the office one last time to collect some personal items I had left behind. It was a Saturday. The building was quiet. I signed in at reception, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked through the empty open-plan space to my old desk by the window. The dumpster in the alley below had been moved or replaced again. The alley was empty. The window was the same. On my desk, someone had left the green Vantara coffee mug. I do not know if it was intentional. I do not know if it was the same one I had left in the conference room or just another one from the bulk order. I picked it up and looked at the logo for a moment. I put it back down. I did not take it with me. Some things you leave. I took my plant, a small pothos that had survived 3 years, on my windowsill, and I took a frame photo of my grandmother that I'd kept in my desk drawer. In the photo, she is standing in front of a gate, laughing, her hand raised. You cannot see the ring in the photo, but I know it is there. I started the compliance consultancy 4 months later. I called it Clearline Advisory. The name took me about 30 seconds to choose. I wanted something that meant exactly what it was. The work is not glamorous. I help small and mid-sized companies build financial controls that actually function, review vendor management processes, set up audit trails, and train finance teams to recognize the early signs of the things I spent 3 years documenting at Vantara. I work mostly with companies that are growing fast and have not yet built the infrastructure to match their ambition. I know what that looks like from the inside. Some of my clients come to me because they have already found something wrong and they need help figuring out what to do next. Those are the conversations I take most seriously. I tell them the same things Martin told me. Document everything, keep copies outside the company system, do not confront anyone before you understand the full picture, and do not let anyone convince you that looking away is the professional thing to do. Looking away is never the professional thing to do. It is just the easier thing, and it is only easier for a while. I think about Daniel Foss sometimes, not often. Mostly, I think about the all-hands meeting, the way he stood at the front of the room, with his sleeves rolled up, and talked about loyalty as if it were a debt his employees owed him. I think about the 200 people in that room who nodded. I think about how many of them felt, in that moment, that they were part of something meaningful. They were, just not the thing he was describing. The company survived, by the way. It was restructured, the executive team rebuilt, and the Series B eventually closed under new leadership 18 months later. I read about it in a trade publication. The new CEO gave a quote about building a culture of transparency and accountability. I thought that was a reasonable thing to say. I wear my grandmother's ring every day. The chip in the metal is still there, exactly where it has always been. Some things do not need to be fixed. They just need to be kept. I built Clearline from a single desk in my spare bedroom. Within the first year, I had 6 clients. Within 2 years, 14. I hired my first employee, a young accountant named Sasha, who had recently left a company under circumstances she described as complicated. I did not press for details on the first interview. I asked instead what she would do if she found something in a client's books that she was not supposed to find. She said she would document it, secure the records, and consult with counsel before taking any further action. I said, "When can you start?" There is a version of this story where the ending is about justice. The fraud uncovered, the wrongdoer removed, the record corrected. That part is true, and it matters. But it is not actually the ending I think about most. The ending I think about is a Saturday morning in my own office, which is a real office now, with a window that looks out onto a street with trees on it. I have a coffee mug on my desk, not green, not branded with anyone else's logo. Just a plain white mug I bought because I liked the weight of it in my hand. I have a client file open in front of me. I have work to do. The work is mine. That is the ending. If you're sitting somewhere right now, looking at numbers that do not add up, feeling that specific, uncomfortable weight of knowing something you have not yet decided what to do with, I am not going to tell you it will be easy. I am not going to tell you there is no cost. I am going to tell you that the cost of the looking away is higher. It is just paid more slowly and more quietly, and usually by someone other than the person who decided to look away. You already know what the numbers say. The question is what you do next. Document everything. Keep copies. Find someone you trust, and do not let anyone tell you that loyalty means silence. It does not. It never did.